Forest and Open Machine with Ven and Christy. And yeah, so I'm here to talk about, I don't know, it seemed like the sort of elephant in the room both in the crypto space for particular reasons that we'll get into, but in the larger sort of state of the country, state of the world is, I'm not afraid to say, like the rise of fascism. And so without being too direct, I'm going to, or getting too into it, I just wanted to read a couple of points from the literary author Umberto Eco, who was an Italian author. When he was a child, he was a member of this. He was a member of Mussolini's. He was a member of the party, and so he wrote a piece in 1995 that was sort of outlining what he called the 14 points of fascism, meaning universal fascism or universal tendencies of fascism. I'm just going to read for most of them, I'm just going to read a quick summary of the point. But for a few, I'm going to that are a little more resonant, I'm going to elaborate a tiny bit more. So point 1, the cult of tradition. Point 2, the rejection of modernism. Point 3, the cult of action for action's sake, also known as move fast, break things. Point 4, disagreement is treason. Point 5, fear of difference. And a quote from what he wrote. The first appeal of a fascist or prematurely fascist movement is an appeal against the intruders. Thus, fascism is racist by definition. Point 6, appeal to social frustration. One of the most typical features of historical fascism was the appeal to a frustrated middle class, a class suffering from an economic crisis or feelings of political humiliation and frightened by the pressure of lower social groups. Point 7, the obsession with a plot. Thus, at the root of fascist psychology, there is an obsession with a plot, possibly an international one. The followers must feel besieged. Point 8, the enemy is both strong and weak. Point 9, pacifism is trafficking with the enemy. Point 10, contempt for the weak. Point 11, everybody is educated to become a hero. Point 12, machismo as weaponry. He writes, machismo implies both disdain for women and intolerance and condemnation of non-standard sexual habits. 13, selective populism. And this quote is kind of interesting. He says, there isn't, and remember this is from 1995, he writes this, there is in our future a TV or internet populism in which the emotional response of a select group of citizens can be presented and accepted as the voice of the people. And then 14, fascism speaks newspeak. Quote, all the Nazi or fascist school books made use of impoverished vocabulary and an elementary syntax in order to limit the instruments for complex and critical reasoning. So some of those hit more than others, but I think that it's, it feels pretty, to me, a lot of the points hit, I suppose it's subjective for what we're going through in the United States right now. So I just wrote a sort of opening question to keep concise. I'll just read instead of go for it. We are dealing with a radically empowered executive branch that operates under nearly all the traditional mantles of historical fascism. If crypto as a movement is fundamentally about perverse centralization and capture, about preventing perverse centralization and capture, this is an emergency. Meanwhile, many of us who see the value of tokens and other Web3 elements for autonomous social infrastructure are finding ourselves in an environment of new regulatory permissiveness. There's been a fair amount of talk about this at the conference so far. So what do you make of this tension? Again, just to summarize, between the sort of rise of this perverse centralization that has these explicitly fascist tendencies, but also this sort of moment of relief where all of a sudden all these awesome technologies are in this new sort of atmosphere of regulatory permissiveness. So what do you make of this tension? Is it an accident or is it functional to something? What's going on here? So yeah, let's just open it up from there.
Yeah, ultimately, we are stuck in a story, and the obsession with the plot, I think, is in the room. The localists, they're coming for our chain stores. They're trying to take away our coins. Yeah, I think they're really we're all stuck in a bad story that's driving us interminably toward this thing that's perversely underneath the surface as, the helpers and the weavers and the good people Benjamin Life here, are the power under, supporting. There is a story that is under everything. And it is a story that we are all sort of in this room. Well, many of us are here to break it, but many of us are not really cognizant of it. And it's money. That money is a story. It's this thing that we all believe in that, systematically separates us, And so it's like when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so this is a phenomenon that I think is rank in the crypto space, even in the regen space, that it's all tokens, 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 tokens. We're trying to recreate money in this kind of abominable combination of axial age commodity hard money and soft money, which is virtual. And so we're just in this weird space, this time of monsters, like the little Gramsci curve of like, the old world is dying and the new world struggles to be born, and we're in the middle space, which is exciting. And the contradiction is inherent that, as some wise tweeters said, we aren't here building products, we're building economies. So we are inherently tinkering with the economic structure of the systems that we're enclosed in. And I think that the superstructure of that is the storytelling, that they sort of form a feedback loop where they reinforce each other. And yeah, I think we need a bold visionary leap forward out of the didactic sort of duality of left and right and red and blue, and all of these dualities, all of these sort of sub-stories that are basically, consequences of individualism, of separation, of isolation. And there's a beautiful world of stories, a plurality of alternatives in between that. And I think we've just got to own this thing and stop being like, oh, well, we're gonna, as this Ethereum communism thing happened, there were so many shitty think pieces from regens defending the free market, this archaic, ancient coordination system that we have just got to move beyond.
Jake, and then we'll go over to you. Yep, we're going to hold the stack.
Yeah, so to your question, like this tension between the the not so good things and maybe some unintended, potentially beneficial side effects if we get to work. I think it's kind of like we're in a forest fire, and we're just it's bad. Forest fires are not fun, but I think maybe a way to think about it is that we're oftentimes those forest fires, they create the nutrients for the next generation of life, part of the cycle. And so that I hope in this movement we're seeding, all the institutions are kind of burning down. A lot of things really suck, but I hope we're the seeds for the next forest.
I think there's I definitely understand the rhetorical point of oh, we're talking about new shit. This isn't communism, right? We're not Stalin, right? And I see a lot of especially in the last round of drama, a lot of regen people, green pill people trying to get away from that. Also people being oh, capitalism isn't bad. We just need to do it in this new way. And I think that I understand why that's attractive. I also understand wanting to distance ourselves from what has been, and also to signal that we are doing something new, right? But ultimately, in this new paradigm of governance, we're already seeing Russia, China, Brazil, Iran making their own DAO and payment system. I don't know if you guys saw that. We're already seeing this new world of higher bandwidth democracies maybe, but there will be hyper crypto capitalist flavors of that. And we will still be in the crypto left flavor of that. And that's why I don't want to abandon, yes, we are striding towards a new paradigm, but even in that paradigm, we will have to struggle, and our identity is still meaningful. So that's why sort of on that, I don't want to cast aside completely the past and say oh, this is just something completely different.
Yeah, I want to share a couple of philosophical concepts that might be helpful as we continue this discussion. They've kind of been alluded to in the remarks so far, but you really hit on one just now. The first is the Hegelian dialectic, that we have a thesis, we have an antithesis, and the synthesis is not just one or the other, it is the combined transcendence of that dichotomy. And so will by definition contain elements of each of the thesis and the antithesis. So you're spot on. And then the other concept, it's from organizational psychology, is that of insiders, outsiders, and beyonders. And that if you're trying to coordinate systems change, it's going to be really difficult for either insiders within the system, pulling the levers of power, or outsiders working, in the street, active, making change in communities, or the beyonders who are out, in the field building something new. It's going to be hard for either of those groups in their own efforts to achieve systems change. But by coordinating across those groups, we can achieve systems change much more effectively. Yeah, hope it's helpful. Those are helpful concepts.
So, I'm going to hop in real quick, man. So one thing I also want to implore everyone to do is look beyond just the monetary applications of our technology and look at how decentralized social media and hyperlocal information networks, how public, knowledge gardens can then break the pattern of weaponizing grievance narratives, which brings us back to one of the points that was in that thing that you read about how people can weaponize that grievance that collectives have and then feel victimized and then put them into a cult or put them towards a fascist agenda. If we can decentralize how people get their information and how they process that, that social layer of comms, I think that is another way we can use our technology outside of the monetary aspects.
I was going to jump in as well. What I really appreciate about communism is that I think that it's basically, I believe in an ethic that workers owning the means of production is actually necessary for an intact, functional society. Where basically if you have private entities that are extracting the surplus value created by labor, you're basically stealing from people. And that's why I think going back to Marxist theory is really helpful for understanding why capitalism doesn't work. I think the centralization of communism and trying to do central planning, like there's really cute images of like Allende's Chile before he was assassinated, where he was like already creating, it was like a PlayStation controller for the government. It was this Star Trek kind of like command station for how they were going to govern the country cybernetically. And it was like way too far ahead of its time, but like with AI, with DAOs and decentralization, like could we have networks of a cooperative economy that achieves what communism was trying to achieve in terms of ownership of the means of production without the kinds of centralization that we saw in communist states? And I think that that's actually a populist egalitarian position, that if we get rid of some of the more, I think the postmodern left has been very exclusionary in terms of like the signs and symbols that you're required to express in order to be seen as an ethical person, that actually are, I believe, the forces of capital commodifying the left movement so that we focus on these identity markers. I think Chris Hedges said it really beautifully that he defines wokeness as caring more about a woman CEO than about female workers. And that basically we have these performative gestures of a different kind of economy, but the actual functional mechanisms of production haven't changed. And I think cooperativism and decentralization are a way to kind of reform what communism was hoping to achieve in a new expression.
Check out Thomas Swan's Anarchist Cybernetics if you're interested in that Salvador Allende reference, by the way.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to connect to what you were saying, this kind of synthesis and between communism and capitalism, and also the need for a new story. I think one thing that for me has really been interesting is looking at the concept of the noosphere, which maybe some of you are familiar with, collective consciousness, and I think it's really timely at this moment. Like, it basically looks like these major evolutionary transitions. We started from single cells, then multi-cells, turning into bigger organism. At each stage, there's like only 8 times this happened, I think, in the whole universe, like history of the universe that we know. And each stage, there's a separate entities, cells, suddenly becoming part of something bigger. And right now, we're humans, and we see ourselves as very disparate and individual, like you're saying. And how do we see ourselves as part of something bigger? I think that's the phase shift. That if we unlock that, then I think a lot of these things actually kind of solve themselves. And connecting to communism and capitalism, I think, yeah, communism probably got right, what you're saying, like the basic thing that we should be collectively owning and kind of we're a part of a bigger collective organism. Maybe what it didn't get right is like you don't do that in a kind of top-down centralized control. Now we have the tools, AI, new ways of sharing knowledge, information ecosystems. We can actually have this kind of decentralized organization, which capitalism, Hayek, right, Friedrich Hayek, and the sort of market, the genius of markets, that they solve all these problems that you can't solve with centralized control, but it's so limiting in another way because, like, okay, it's only coins, and now all we care about are these coins. So new kinds of coins, new kinds of tools for controlling information, sharing information. I think we have we can bring about that third story now. It's like, this is the time. How do we do it, though? Anyone else?
Yeah, we were just talking about that before we got started, that, we actually have the ability now for everyone here to signal their needs, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and have the information platforms that can synthesize them into a means that can create this perpetual flow. And so, yeah, I just keep thinking about this phrase, transcend and include, like to what Ron was saying and to what Benjamin was saying. What we're creating contains everything that's ever been explored before. Every single possibility is contained in the now, in this really weird, messy space where we're learning from all of them. We're learning from the mistakes, we're learning from the failures, we're learning from the successes. And we're creating these new spaces where we can explore and experiment. But I don't think that we should abandon the past. And I think that the deep past, especially of how indigenous people lived, embodies all of this, that communism was a reactionary take on indigenous life, that also there are many numerous beautiful examples of anarchy, real anarchy, that divine anarchy that our friend whose name I don't know articulated, that in Ukraine before the Soviet Union really even took hold, people did it. They did the thing. They seized the means of production, and the workers had a system that worked for them. Mutualism was the original form of communism before Marx even came around and said we need to use the working class as a Gundam to take over the state. So yeah, there are beautiful examples like in Rojava and in Chiapas where people are living in a truly decentralized society, in a distributed society, and incorporating all the best practices from all the periods of history that we have access to and synthesizing them into these new information systems bound by a new shared story that we are all collectively dreaming and envisioning. That's my shit. That's where it's at.
Before you hop on, I want to make sure that we also
I don't need to speak, actually.
No, well, I want to just create a moment of pause to see if someone who hasn't spoken yet wants to bring their voice in before we start doing another round of people who've already spoken. Yeah. I think this one might reach further. There you go.
I just want to make an observation that the direction that we're seeing with the populist movement towards fascism is not the only system capture element that we're dealing with. Like, I've been looking for 30 years at neoliberal systems capture and the processes of disempowerment of communities and how these processes work at the administrative level. And so I think it's really important for us to really consider if we're looking to push back against authoritarian measures, whether they're coming from left, right, whatever, it's really important for us to really focus on hyper-localism and empowerment of communities and capacity building and the opportunities to really hand the keys of power over to communities and to really support communities in self-empowerment and all of the different mechanisms and tools that are at our disposal collectively.
I want to ask a kind of riddle. Do you have something?
Oh, Adina just was
go for it.
inspired
Oh, sorry.
to jump in as someone who's grown up in a communist country.
I was born in a communist country, so I felt that maybe I should say something. How do I make this concise? Okay, so I was born in Romania during communism. I experienced then Germany. I've studied, by the way, Hegel. So there was like a lot of things that just triggered my mind, just joining this conversation for a second. I think it's interesting because what happened in communism, of course, is the reality versus the vision. And the reality was actually a technologically enabled upper class. And this is what we're seeing over and over again, right? As soon as you actually detach people from their land, from their sustenance, where they know that they can survive, and you make them dependent on an invisible hand of a system that is now organizing your needs for life and your life support, that's when things just go wrong. And we've seen it here, of course, also with the technical tools that have been developed. And I think one of the things that is so important in this new era of digital tools that we're spearheading with Web3 is to always think of how to connect them back to reality and to our life support systems. And I think I'm only seeing that now. I've been in this space since 2017, and everything was so virtual and so detached from life. And if we can actually not figure out how people in real world can actually use those tools to build communities, and this is why this is so beautiful, this conference here, because this is what it's all about. And because otherwise we just repeat the same mistakes over and over again. Tech is not going to solve it. Community will. So
yeah, I tend to agree with some of our right libertarian friends that the legacy of communism is sort of tarnished. I think because of its association with statism. The things that I think the opportunities for like discourse between left and right lies in a sort of like libertarian impulse. There's a rich tradition of libertarian socialism, democratic municipalism, and my favorite word is, I think the word of the moment for me is mutualism, 1000%. But so I have a question, kind of in the form of a riddle. There's been a lot of talk of like, oh, what do you mean they're going through and cutting all these agencies and limiting government? Like, what could be authoritarian about that? So the the riddle is deregulation a statist action?
Yeah, I think it depends who controls the state, right? And that's the interesting thing, is that it seems like there's this wraparound phenomenon going on where capital has seized control of the state through a democratic process. But the tensions I wanted to raise earlier were like scarcity and abundance. That's one of the sort of subtexts I hear running through a lot of these conversations. And I wonder the extent to which recent advances in artificial intelligence and the rise of these decentralized capital allocation mechanisms, like, do people think we have an abundant future? Like, I don't know. I'm kind of optimistic more than I have been in the past. And like, I grew up watching Star Trek and stuff. So like, transporters, and you can just like materialize what you need out of thin air. I don't know, like maybe 100 years. And so the question is like, can we get there? I don't know. I think we can.
I think along those lines, and I'm going to bring it back to Adina here because you made some excellent points. I used to document in areas that had just gone through their authoritarian phases. And one of the things I studied was security demographics. And one of the things they looked at was what happens when a young demographic between the ages of 17 and say 27 doesn't have the means to make a living. It causes instability to nation state. And I was in Nepal when the government collapsed after the 10-year Maoist conflict. And I got to see both sides of that result. And what I found in the Maoist countryside was all of the community resources they needed that were provided by the soldiers and by the Maoists that allowed young people to have a future. And I feel like that is where our technology can interject instead of having to be a soldier or having to go into criminal activities like in some African countries as well. A lot of young people end up working in nefarious ways because it is the only option. But now that we have this technology that can, AI and decentralization, crypto, whatever we want to call it, that can provide a mechanism for them to create their own means so they don't have to turn to something that is violent to survive.
Thanks. I just wanted to respond to that question about abundance and scarcity. So yeah, our current economic systems are based on scarcity, but it doesn't have to be that way. We do have abundance in this world. It's just not evenly distributed. It's like if you were to take the entire wealth of the world or the entire national income of the world and split it up between each person. I can't remember what the number is now, but you could Google it. It's like it's actually quite a reasonable amount, enough for everyone to have a good life. It's just that we see over time more and more concentration of wealth, especially over the last 40 years, really, maybe 50 years, we've had more and more concentration of wealth. We all know this. We've seen the graphs, but it becomes more and more extreme over time. Even over the last 5 years, the wealth disparity between the poorest and richest has doubled in the supposed wealthiest countries in the world. The economy is
booming relatively, right? Even though for most people it's not reflected in their reality. So we know that our economic systems don't serve, and actually they concentrate more and more power. So in terms of abundance, we actually have it, and AI and other technologies and automation and all these things that we have is going to bring more abundance and less need for humans to work. But actually, I suspect that this is part of the reason that we're seeing this power grab right now by established oligarchs, by capital at this time right now, because people are seeing this. We're kind of screwed. We own all this infrastructure, but it's actually going to be worthless because everyone's going to be able to create their own sustenance, their own thriving local ecosystem wherever they are. So let's try and grab as much as we can right now while we still can, and not just grab physical assets and control of the state, but the whole narrative, the whole let's reprogram cultural ideologies. So I think we're the battle lines have been drawn, and it's happening right now. I don't think we have a lot of time to waste. But I think I still optimistic. I'm hopeful, maybe not optimistic, but I think we need to have that hope. We need to know that we can create these alternative systems, and just in terms of even when you said communism, Ben, everyone laughed. It's a word that's not really respected still in the space, and I know it's had some memes around it or whatever, but I think it's very important for us all to know some Marxist theory and to know about anarchism and to know things that have worked in the past and have not worked in the past, and certainly our examples of communist states over the past 57 whatever years have not been great. But I would say that that's partly the level of production was, we weren't wealthy enough to have that wealth shared out as a planet. And certainly I would say that the systems of central planning were, things got corrupted. But I think, what we have the opportunity to do now, which is really exciting, and maybe we need a new word for it, or maybe we don't, is to have decentralized planning. We have that ability, but that wasn't possible. That wasn't possible when Marx was writing. It wasn't possible in the USSR because there was you can even make a phone call. Now we can literally connect with anywhere in the world and vote in all these incredible ways and make decisions collectively. And so I think that's a new possibility for a new flavor of communism that's driven by human need and facilitated by technology.
Can I just in the spirit of not reinventing the wheel, because often when I'm here, I hear a lot of concepts that have already existed for 150 years somewhere else. So one is co-ops. Most of Europe is organized since 150 years by co-ops, which is actually what a DAO is, right? There's already legal structures for that. There's already governance structures. Most of Switzerland is organized in banks, food supply systems as co-ops. The structures are already there. We can just take them and advance on them instead of starting anew. Secondly, my experience was that the best system that I have been living in was social democracy, which was Germany, which was slightly communist, but also democratic, right? And so what I remember was so cool, and everybody's constantly laughing about Germany of not being digitized, but there was an act after the Second World War and after the horrendous surveillance that was going on, that they learned one thing: the state cannot control, cannot have a transparent citizen. So every single state, state bureaucracy was separated from each other, and they can't share data with each other, which is why everything was made on paper, right? So you couldn't actually digitally share it. And then everybody wanted digitalization, and that's great, but that of course led to the fact that now everybody can see your whole, your whole history, medical history. And Germany was set up because of its history, trying to actually prevent history from repeating again, right? In the US, in the name of digitalization, we have created a surveillance state because there was no understanding of how to protect actually the privacy of citizens from the state. Another thing is in communism, all my aunts, everybody I grew up with was an engineer, a mathematician. I'm the only philosopher in the family. and that is because in communism, women were put equally to the forefront as men to actually build this new society, and because they were able to have children and actually work because the state was completely taking care of that. So we didn't see companies where you have 100% of a male board, but you always had 50-50. I mean, there were no companies, but you basically have organizations that were equally represented. So that was a good thing. And unionization. Unionization is the most important thing for every healthy society. In Paris, people can still organize, and you can still not take a train, and you don't get food if the farmers don't want you to, right? So we see that in Germany, we see that in all over Europe. Unionization is the only thing that keeps democracy in check and keeps power in check. And in the McCarthy era here, communism was demonized precisely because the unionization that was starting in the US. And we see it with Jeff Bezos. Everybody loves Jeff Bezos. I don't love him. He's destroying unions. You know. So yeah, just a bit food for thought that there's a lot that has already been worked on and that we could actually look at and maybe integrate.
Key tenet of Ethereum localism, by the way, is exactly what you're saying, I think.
Sure. Is working with cooperatives. We're integrating them into the crypto world. We have Labor DAO, which is a DAO-based labor union as part of the Bread Chain cooperative, and very much agree with you that we need to find people where they're at and then work with them, and only then we can start making our own crypto native, reinventing the wheel kind of stuff.
Nice, thanks for adding that.
Thanks. Let's see. The greatest trick Moloch ever pulled on us was to give us hundreds of languages in the world so we couldn't communicate and coordinate. And then I think his second greatest trick was all the fear and scarcity that he implanted into societies so that we would stop using the one universal language that we have, which is our heart and our love. There's a language of our heart, a language of our love that connects us all as humanity. And Moloch has not been able to take that one away from us, other than to create the fear inside of us that we can't share that with other human beings and truly connect at a deep, meaningful level, so that all of these isms or whatever we're going to create can actually work, because it all comes back to like the self. It's like it's about a self-ism, but not in an individualistic sake, but to like really take care of ourselves and learn to access and share your humanity with other people. That's where the real work is, and then that's how all of this stuff actually works in the end. Without that, none of these isms, none of these structures, none of these technologies will ever work. And so we have to embody that in the work that we are doing, along with building community in ourselves. I love you all. I appreciate you all. I'm so glad that we're here. And thank you.
That was beautiful.
I had another point about the. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just kind of building off that, I'd like to speak into the space commoning rather than communism. So rather than focusing on a configuration of the state, taking more of a grassroots bottom-up approach to orienting our own lives into networks of mutualization of resources, taking time to care, to share, and to focus on relational interactions rather than transactional interactions. And I think looking at the Web3 space, you get almost like an interesting hybrid model of that, because I see blockchains as commoning, like commons, public goods infrastructure. You know, like no one owns Ethereum. It's a decentralized open source technology that anyone can run and anyone can opt into. So it is a form of commoning, but it's also offering transactional infrastructure. So it's like this nexus point of bringing these different worlds together. But yeah, I wanted to speak into that concept of commoning over communism.
So there's 2 points I want to kind of try to synthesize together here. One, off of love and off of putting this stuff into action, about going from just ideology into methodology. How do we embed this shit into what we're doing? Not in a theoretical sphere, but into our actual lives. And I just want to sort of breathe into, you know, my own heart. My own heart's palpitations are my own struggles with money that I have almost none. I had to, you know, have a friend get me dinner last night, you know? And I think that's something where all these ideas really hit the road, is when we start to actually realize we're all in this circle together. We're all equal in our own different way. And it's very unfair the way we run things. It's very inefficient that some people have millions of dollars worth of stored potential, magical reality-changing energy that's just sitting in an account or in a fucking coin, rather than making it circulate perpetually, centropically through the system, so that it is going in continual motion and gaining in real-world value every time it goes through. And so to answer your question about deregulation, the gutting of the commons, or of the last vestige of the commons, which has been administered through the state, is an extremely, incredibly planetary, violent act. It is an act of violence against all creation to claw back anything that workers have created. And workers did that. The state did not, of its own beneficence, give us health care. It never gave it us here. But yeah, before that, how did we meet our needs? Unions, and unions were not just collective bargaining. Unions were the place where people came together and met their needs, where they educated each other, where they shared resources. The welfare system was not state-run until that. It was done by communities, churches, villages. It was done by us. And so how we seize the day and actually make it so that we're all accelerationists now, like whether we like it or not, shit is getting gutted. And we have to create that infrastructure to enable the real people in this world and way beyond this room to be able to share resources and to create a massive, enormous, perpetually flowing syntropic spiral of increasing wealth through collaboration so that we can come together and realize number together bigger.
Just to add a tiny little bit in there, and then we're going to go to Nikhil and then over to Shannon. One, just towards what you were saying, Sean, about the commoning in Ethereum. In some ways, we're like on the threshold between like protocol feudalism and true commoning. I think as a global network, it is possible for it to be a commons, but I don't think that it's operating as one right now. And so that's an inquiry I want to just lob into the space, is how could Ethereum be more governed as a commons? And then second, just shouting out the Black Panther Party, which was such a threat to the state because it was providing that utility to community outside of the traditional systems. And the free breakfast program in the state of California was actually a tactic by the state to claw back some of that power that they had gained by providing that service. So I'm curious, like, the more that we provide services, like especially as these institutions and agencies are being defunded, if we actually pick up the slack that's created by that as a tactic to gain political power to actually provide that utility for communities as the state is collapsing. Hell yeah. Yeah, if you want to jump in, you can. Yeah, there's chairs. There's chairs. There's two. Yeah. And there's one more right there. We can make a bigger circle.
Yeah, sorry, I don't think we're doing so much as Fishbowl as to like just grab a chair and squeeze in.
Appreciate you actually mentioning the Black Panther Party. I was thinking about that as well. Technology reflects what our society, right? It's not the other way around. And I think I struggle with that a lot in Web3, where we think that a technological solution will influence society. I think it actually is the other way around. And it always has been. Like, no movement was started because of technology. Movement was started because of people, and then you may use technology. And I think of like the freedom rides, right? The freedom rides used technology. It wasn't that they said, oh, the bus is an opportunity for us to change society. It's actually, no, we have to change society, and bus is a tool to use that. And I think in that case, if you take that framing, it approaches things differently, right? For us, because it's then the intersubjective aspect of where else are we in the world? It's not simply in Ethereum. It's actually, where are we locally in our communities? Are we working on other things such as fair wages? Are we working on criminal justice reform? That has nothing to do with Ethereum or technology. And then you can use technology to, of course, support that. So I've always had this question of like, is my impact better served by working in technology at a tech company? Or should I actually just go back to what I was doing before, which is actually working at, let's say, a racial justice organization or a criminal justice reform nonprofit? And I think we've seen the tension of that, right? Even in like the largest like crypto company in the United States, publicly traded, their mission is economic freedom. But if you remember, this was when in 2020, they very explicitly said that we are not going to talk about certain things in the workplace. And I think we forget that, but that was really crucial because we see that manifest itself today in the halls of power. So I've been reflecting a lot on that aspect of how are we applying technology, and which comes first?
Just real quick, Devansh, I think we have to push from outside and inside to answer your question. I think it's both. Yeah.
I want to respond to your riddle comment earlier, because the suffering is the point. The isolation is the point. The separation of knowledge from community elements, that's the point. The way strongman dynamics works is you separate people from the things that they need, and you cause panic, and you cause helplessness, and you cause feelings of desperation. And then you show up and you say, I'm your savior. I'm the answer to your question. And so if we want to be able to counter that, I see both AI and blockchain as being absolutely amazing, possibly transformational tools for connecting flows of resources down to community groups that are desperately looking for that support. And it's a way for us to be able to act on a globalist level while still really prioritizing localist effort by aligning with and collaborating with local groups that have spent decades in these communities building this capacity, building these resources, building these connections, and really being a lifeline to be able to supply these resources and to be able to supply the capacity so that they can toe the line and be able to create the resilience at the community level and the capacity at the community level where they can then do the things that they need to do without top-down controls, without coordination, without any of the things that really kind of feed into the methods of the machine.
Go to Ronan, Colleen, Monty, Ben.
Go for it, Colleen.
Figure it out of my yes.
I'll go here. I just wanted to give a couple of resources that are really helping me and my family and some of my friends right now. And one of them is doing a lot of reading, following Nathan Schneider, who was speaking yesterday. We come from a real tech background in my family, and so this whole localism, especially I'm older than a lot of you guys, is like, holy cow, we have a lot to learn. And so on the way here, I was reading this book that Nathan recommended, which is Reflections, and it's from the priest who started the Mondragon cooperatives, and it was during a time, 1940s, during a real fascism time, and he talks a lot about cooperatives being based on action and experience versus theory, and really evolving, like let's just act, let's just get out and start doing. And I think I tend to want, as John knows, like A, B, C, D, E, and I'll go do it. Just show me the model. But I think as I get older and things are changing so much, I'm more like, let's just jump in and work together and put all of our brains together and cooperate, because that's the way it's going to work. And no one has it perfect. But I really appreciate this discussion because part of what I think we need to do is also bring people with us, like an older generation who's really afraid right now. And I have a group called Sisterhood in Democracy, and they asked me to be the leader last time, and I'm like, oh my God. It's 6 artists, 5 teachers, and me with a tech background, and they're very much against pushing back. Like, what can we do to push back against what's happening? And I just wanted to bring up the fact that another person I follow is John Alexander, and he wrote this book called Citizens, Why the Answer to Fixing Everything is All of Us. Really great book, and it goes back to the idea of changing the narrative. And so many of us who grew up in my era see ourselves as consumers, right? After 9/11, we were supposed to go shopping. Because self-interest is what is good for the common interest. That never really made sense to me. I just have to say that. And so I was leading this group of 12 women, and I just wanted to suggest to them that maybe this is a good thing, and maybe this is a chance to see a different narrative. And they were like looking at me like I was really weird. But maybe instead of seeing ourselves as consumers, maybe we are citizens. We are people who, by nature, are caring, cooperative, and creative. And we need to start seeing ourselves that way. If we see ourselves as consumers, we just go around doing our own thing and being self-interested. And I think what really inspires me about a lot of you guys is, I don't know, you skip that gene. You're like, no way are we consumers. We are going straight to the citizen action, and it's so inspiring. So and the other thing that worries me is there's a lot of people who want to take us back to being subjects, and especially women. You are subjects, you keep your head down, you get what you're given, you do what we tell you, and the God-given few at the top are going to decide what's best for all of us. And so I think there's these powers right now. So you guys are really helping me step into the citizen model. And I just wanted to say thanks and offer those resources. Woo.
Yeah, I've just been thinking about the kind of like the battles that we face as a community here. And I think obviously there's the more traditional political battles that we face against the far right, Trump, the tech oligarchs, the trillions of capital that exists in that space. But also very much in crypto as well. I feel like there is a huge battle, and you look at the way big crypto is making their way into politics and doing all sorts of dystopian, individualistic kind of stuff that is, to be honest, the bulk of crypto, and we sit in this niche and we talk about all these amazing things, and then anyone from the outside, and justifiably so, is going to see all of the terrible dystopian shit that is going on in crypto. And so it is a huge battle that we face. And yeah, what do we do about that? We can organize great, localism concepts, etc. But if we don't defeat the beast, then we'll just continue to remain a niche and do our thing. But we're not going to win the overall battle. So yeah, how can we win the culture war and actually grow and scale this thing to be actually meaningful as opposed to just theoretical? That's my provocation.
I'm tracking the stack, so we're going to go over here to Ben. We're going to go over to you and to run it, and then we're going to loop back around this way. Yeah.
Quick answer, or send Robert Axelrod, 1984, Evolution of Cooperation. I would read that. There's answers in there for that. And then, yeah.
The Evolution of Trust is a good game as well.
Right, which is built off of Axelrod's. Yeah. It's all influenced from that book. Yeah. Okay, so this is just a little bit from Gilbert Simondon who was like a critique of cybernetics, but still used it. But some from him on the dangers of over-optimizing for compatibility with existing systems when designing new systems. Here, hold on. The technical object, in becoming integrated into a system, loses some of its individuality and becomes subjected to the constraints of the whole. A system once established tends to maintain itself and resist transformation, not through a lack of possibilities, but due to the inertia of the technical and social order that has been created. It is not enough for the technical object to adapt to an existing system. It must be capable of bringing forth new orders of existence. The technical lineage is often burdened with the weight of past systems, as each new object inherits the characteristics of those that preceded it, even when such characteristics no longer serve a purpose. Last one. The essence of true innovation lies in the capacity of a system to transform itself, to induce a transductive process that creates a new mode of existence, rather than perpetuating the old.
Hey, I'm Boris. As another person who was born and raised in a communism country, I would like to kind of chime in too a little bit, my thoughts and feelings. Sometimes a lot of people, when I see they talk about communism or common goods or common values, they often mix up things because it just sounds common or it sounds familiar, but actually there's a lot of things when we confuse forest for the trees, right? For example, there's a good example like Soviet countries has a lot of women in power during times when other capitalist countries didn't have that much of women in power, but it doesn't mean that helped to find or fight misogyny, right? Or fight woman oppression. No, actually, till today, women are not protected in communist countries. I still consider Russia as a communist country, okay? So women are not protected. They just been drawn into the system because there was shortage of men, right? And a lot of people don't even know those explanations. Same goes for we look in a communist country and people love each other more, they share more. They share more because there's a beast behind the door, right? Chasing them, so they have to be more friendly to each other and share more things, right? So when I see those things, I think in the future we can still maybe try to implement the system, but what I love about localism approach is like, as a good startup, you can start small, make it work for a village, look for a decade, maybe make it work for a county, then wait a little more. And I think the good way to approach and move forward is maybe not looking to pick a battle or create the war or win the cultural war or even open that conversation. Maybe localism is a much better way to approach it. Okay, you have an idea. You still want to make communism work. Start with the village. Pay attention, right? Respect the feelings of the people who are involved, right? Maybe be ready to abandon your hopes for like winning or opening cultural wars and maybe just doing like local changes, slow changes, and healthy and sustainable approach, like layering those changes instead of just ramming them in, because we see in the history like ramming the changes in never produced the outcomes we actually value over a long time.
Amazing, thank you for that. We're in the last 10 minutes before lunch, so let's go around this way, and if everyone can be a little bit more succinct so we make sure we get everyone in the stack.
Thanks. Yeah, I wanted to follow on that. I do feel, I mean, there is the tension between building things slow, like we understand there's this like slow growth to these processes, but also there's urgency, because it does feel like there's people that want to enslave society almost, and they have most of the money and power. And yeah, I just feel, it feels to me like before the Civil War, like 1860s maybe, like there's this, people that want slaves and people that don't want slaves, but there was like there was equal power on each side, and now there's, I don't know, it doesn't feel like, sometimes I wonder like how do we resist that? And if doing our local thing is enough, or if there needs to be more resistance. So just a question, I don't know.
I'm going to take this mic and pass it over here. Oh, same. Okay, great. You hold on to that. You're going to go next.
I think there's massive opportunity right now for us to build tools to empower citizens, and that comes with the deregulation, whether we're seeing that as fire and et cetera, but people that have built P2P commerce that are now no longer in jail for that. That's a good thing, I think, objectively, and I'm not saying everything is good, and that can enable those of us that are trying to build these tools for citizens, for communities, and then especially for individuals to protect ourselves. Self-interest is not the enemy. Everyone here is self-interested. There's power, status, games, capital in all groups, whether it's left, right, if it's a village, it's anything, that is all here. We're all here out of self-interest too. So we talk about taking care of ourselves. Also recognize that you're not a bad person if you are self-interested, and also trying to help everybody else. I have so many thoughts on this. I'm stressed in the group setting. But so I think we need to be building the tools, use this opportunity. Don't blame yourself for every bad thing that's happening in the world, or every bad thing that's happening even in your local community. Try to find the areas where you best can help, and don't over-identify with your beliefs or any label. That's just, I think, a general software, hardware issue in our brains that we need to be aware of. And if we do that, then that's going to define everything else. So try to take every opinion and every belief on a case-by-case basis, wear your beliefs lightly, and don't be afraid to update your mental models with new information in reality as you go.
So I would say in this last election cycle, I was really heartbroken to see big blockchain depose isn't the right word, but Sherrod Brown lost his seat in the Senate because of all the money that was flowing in from tech. And I would like to challenge everybody. I don't know, I think most of you are probably familiar with the YIMBY movement, but it's a beautiful way of organizing at the local level and getting involved. We actually have to get involved politically. You were speaking about the DAOs. DAOs can't really happen in California because there's no DAO legislation. Yeah, so we have to take that stuff on. We've started actually in San Francisco, we've started a policy and advocacy meetup group, and that's the problem we're trying to solve right now, is how to get DAO legislation passed in California. But there's these small things that we all need to do in the real political sphere to actually make this change and make it, you know, somebody like Sherrod Brown could have been convinced, potentially, if he had enough constituents who cared and told them they cared and educated him about all of the amazing things that blockchain can do. So that's, please get involved.
I guess getting into your sort of thing. So if you want to talk about, you know, how we maybe make it so that people like Sherrod Brown wouldn't think of blockchain as like a terrible bad thing, I'm doing a session in the first unconference on mutualization protocols and collaboration monsters, because we're about to introduce a whole new meta and we're going to fucking win.
Perfect setup, yeah. We want to broadcast that through the whole space about how do we actually come together and structurally become interdependent. No more Charles Eisenstein quotes until we're actually inter-invested and inter-cooperating. Like, until we are actually federating into an ecosystem that has clear agreements, where we are mapping out our projects and creating feedback loops between them, we are not independent and we are not anything. What's we? What is we? Who is we? A bunch of people who come together at conferences and fucking feel so good because we're having these conversations, and then we disperse back into being individual self-maximizing units. And that's why our own individual self-needs are stressful. That's why, you know, we have to focus on ourselves. My Lakota friend was like, we're totally against this idea of like self-reliance, because it's like, it's childish. It's like, you focus on helping other people, and if you have a good system and a trustful society, a system you can trust. It's not a trustless system. It's a system that we trust. You help other people, and it comes back to you, and you don't have to focus on yourself. You don't have to focus on your own needs. And so I just want to end, you know, my own little spiel into this space, my own yap, just talking about the need for storytelling. That storytelling is what I do. I'm a storyteller. I'm a filmmaker. I'm a yapper, and I'm creating a company that's developing a new system to enable us to storytell in a different way beyond marketing and advertising. I think Web3, or whatever the fuck we're called, first of all, yeah, we need new words. Like crypto is but broken, the left is broken, communism is broken. All these words have been charged and hijacked and fucked up. And so, yeah, we need new words and we need new methodologies, but we need a vision. We need a beautiful big story that we're telling. There's like a marketing term where like you're focusing too much on the product. And I think in our meta narrative, we're focusing too much on tech, because this isn't about tech. It's about tech to get us, you know, into relation, into something that is real, something that is physical, something that we are. So because storytelling is not just what we say, it is what we are. But it is an intentional practice that I just want to say, it isn't just marketing. It isn't just, you know, how we get more customers and things like that. It is the very essence of who we are. It is the art of becoming. And we can tell a better story together. We have the story. Like, this is such an exciting place to be. All of us are on amazing adventures. We travel the world. We meet up with each other in awesome snow-capped mountains, and in Bali, and in the Commons Hub in Austria, and in Kenya, and we're on an adventure. All of us are on a great adventure, and that's a beautiful attractor that I just don't feel like is front and center, because it's all this crunchy tech and all these words about Schelling points and, you know, hyperstitions and all this stuff that is just like, that just makes people confused. The role of storytelling and sense-making, story as a sense-making practice, is to end confusion, is to clarify, is to bring people into something that they understand and can be a part of. That's it.
I'm going to just kind of bring us on home, and then you're probably going to close this out, because Colleen, you said something that also resonated. So I just want to put this into the collective conversation. I found a necklace a few months ago at a flea market, and it has this great quote on it, and I don't know the attribution of the quote. But basically it is, fate said to the warrior, you cannot withstand the storm. And the warrior said to fate, I am the storm. And so I think all of us are call to action. You can be a Category 5 hurricane, or you can be a sprinkle and nurture the earth. Like, choose your storm and then move through it.
So in the spirit of Buckminster Fuller, you know, don't try to change an existing system, but basically build a new one that makes the old one obsolete. I encourage everybody to have courage and to actually not just inherit the bias of old systems. Don't create a protocol that is feeding into existing market mechanisms. Create something that is actually shifting market mechanisms. Don't put carbon credits on chain. I don't want to insult anybody here before you have understood what impact is. If you don't know what impact is, you can't put a carbon credit on chain. Go back to first principles. Go back to the drawing board. Create new architectural, a new architecture for the systems that we're building. Don't just take an LLM and tweak it. Understand what you're inheriting and start from scratch. And I think that's the best way forward. And be bold in what you're building.
Whew. Okay. Wow. That was quite a talk. So I was thinking about I've been thinking about encounter based. I've been thinking about, like, given that I had my own critiques or problems with legalistic or rights-based models for social progress. But now that the sort of rug has been pulled on all that, whether you call it like mutualistic or cooperative-based or commoning, it seems like sort of grassroots encounter-based method is kind of where we're at. And I just actually came up because you said that. I think maybe the term is flea market socialism. But I don't know.
I said we were going to name a new ideology today. That's it.
Is that it? We'll have to think about it. Incidental, yeah. Cool. All right, let's eat lunch.
Well, I want to do a little summary of just like, we did something here. Like this conversation matters because like that spiraling was actually us collectively exploring the possibility space together. And so just to reflect back some of the themes that I heard, cooperativism and unionization so that workers own the companies or businesses that they work for and that those businesses are integrated to be of service to the places where they are. I also heard just these themes of non-coercion. I think especially people who grew up inside of communist countries dealing with the effect of a state that is actively coercing people, so that it needs to be opt-in, it needs to be something that people choose to do, and that's something that we iterate on locally. It's not some macroeconomic plan that we enforce on people, and that a big part of the cosmo-local infrastructure, if we're going to create a kind of cosmo-local social political movement, is about how do we connect the flows of resources from the global level to the local level and retain the autonomy of local communities at the grassroots level. That's my summary of what we just did together. That wouldn't have been possible without everyone adding their voices in. I'm sure I missed some parts, but just want to reflect back. That was an incredibly generative conversation. So thank you all for participating.
I also want to just briefly shill my unconference tomorrow, which is open-ended mutualism, which is kind of the premise that that like mutualism between humans sort of can't really work unless we're sort of exercising our empathic muscles and thinking about like the greater than human world as well. So
I want to say something to that. Yeah, I really want to like really push for this, if that's okay, or invite people into something. I would love to have sessions where we're really discussing the primitives of cooperation, federation, collaboration monsters, all these things. And then at the end of this whole session, literally get a giant piece of paper out and map out, or a mural board or whatever tech-enabled thing we have, and map out our system. What is the ecosystem of all these projects here? How do they fit together? What are the flows and the method mechanisms like commitment pooling and new currencies and other networks that can actually interconnect them in a structural pattern where we can actually function as an autonomous collective?
Woo. All right, that's our goal. One of many goals. Enjoy lunch. We'll see you back here in an hour. I mean, I love reading Marx, but I am not a Marxist. Exactly. That's why I read it, is because the critique is so good.